Hey everyone, my name is Alex Zychek. I'm a research data scientist at the Cleveland Clinic. Today we're going to talk about riskcalc.org, a repository of risk calculators for medical decision making. So, first, a little bit of background. So, I'm part of a department called Quantitative Health Sciences, which has over 100 statisticians, data scientists, statistical programmers, researchers, and our primary function is to provide quantitative and statistical support to all the different research activities that happen throughout Cleveland Clinic. So we work on things like clinical trials and study design all the way to precision medicine, population health, and really spanning a wide range of disease areas. And so my work focus is mainly on clinical prediction modeling and a lot of observational statistical analysis, primarily with electronic health record and registry data. So what is riskcalc.org? So it's a free-to-use platform that we've developed that's really meant for individualized medical decision making and for clinician and patient use. So counseling patients in the office to evaluate the risk of different clinical outcomes. And so we have it embedded with this big collection of predictive models that have been developed through published research studies. And so the majority of these models are some sort of regression model. And each one of these calculators is its own standalone RShiny application. And on the website, we get about 10 to 15,000 users per month. So how does this all work in the back end? So we develop our applications locally using R and Shiny, and we find one way or another to get the model into the app, whether that's storing it as a R data object or hard coding the model straight into the code of the app. And then we push it to GitHub, and this is mostly for transparency to expose kind of how the app's working in the back end. But then we load our code up into a open source Shiny server that sits on AWS, and this is what you're actually interacting with when you're on riskcalc.org. And so the really nice thing about this setup is that it's a very low cost infrastructure. The only thing that incurs some cost is the compute needed for AWS, but otherwise we're using all these free and open source tools. So some of the recent developments that we've been working on, we've put all of the source code for our apps publicly available on our department's GitHub page, and we've also added source links to the different applications themselves to take you to the source code. So if we go to one here, we can see on the bottom a source code link. We can open that up. It's going to take you to the spot on GitHub where that code lives, and you can kind of inspect and see how the app's functioning. We've been working on updating our homepage of riskcalc.org to make it the user interface a little cleaner and easier to navigate, a little more user friendly. So we have all these icons for different disease areas, and you click one and it's going to take you down to the collection of risk calculators relevant to that disease category. And then finally, we've been working on an R package that's really meant to help accelerate building some of these risk calculators in our standard risk calc format. And so this is sitting on our department's GitHub page as well. But the main function here is this risk calculator function where when we call it, it's going to create a directory containing your application files, and it's going to pre-configure all of these boilerplate pieces that we typically put in our risk calculators, and then you can start there and add the stuff specific to your model. Or if you have a model object built, in this case a Cox proportional hazards model, you can send that model to the risk calculator function along with a bunch of different formatting options, and you're going to similarly get a directory with all your application files but pre-populated with that model's specifications, and you'll have something like this. So it'll be a functioning risk calculator that's really working like the standard apps work on riskcalc.org, and you can do any further tweaks from there. So some of the places that we're thinking of going with it are first with our current backend and our current setup using open source Shiny server on AWS. What are some of the things that we could do? So we're thinking of how can we more formally integrate GitHub into our workflow. Currently, we put the code on GitHub again for transparency purposes, but the code isn't really connected to the actual live website. And so how can we use things like CI/CD to actually have the app source code live on GitHub? How can we better maintain and manage the different packages and versions of those packages and R itself on our server? We often run into issues where somebody's developing an application with more recent package versions or R versions, and we've actually had to go and retrofit apps back to what's going to work on the Shiny server to try not to break everything on there. And then a more standardized, cohesive format for how we represent the models in the backend for RiskCalc. So right now, as I said, we kind of hard code models right into the source code, or we'll store stuff as an R object. But we want to kind of generalize the concept of a risk calculator to mean not just a regression model, but any sort of mathematical object that produces a risk of an outcome, which could be machine learning or some things like that. And how can we have a more standardized, cohesive framework to kind of power the back end regardless of what our actual model methodology is? And then finally, model monitoring and updating. So a lot of the times these models are developed in the research setting. We build a risk calculator, put it on the website, and then we kind of move on to the next thing. It becomes this internet artifact, and not a lot of attention is paid to how the model is doing over time. And so how can we start to think of monitoring these models going forward, keeping them up to date, and seeing how they do over time, not just at the point in time where they were developed. And then thinking more broadly about future states with this risk calculator platform, can we make it more of a one-stop shop for clinical risk prediction? How can we get more community involvement, whether that's for kind of outsourcing validations for different models and then posting those validation scores from different parts of the globe to see how this model is performing, and maybe upvoting or ranking model performance, or grouping collections of similar models together, because there are a lot out there. API development, so can we make some of these models programmatically accessible to different organizations to be able to take our model output and use in your own applications? And then thinking more broadly as like a research ecosystem around this risk calculator framework. How can we, like I said, there's lots of different models and risk calculators out there that do a lot of similar things, and so how can we think of methodological ways to, say, pool information from different models to create the best estimate of risk for a given outcome, and being more integrated with the clinical day-to-day operational side of delivering care and using these models in clinical practice. So finally, I just want to give a few acknowledgments to some of the co-developers over the years. So Alex, Kathy, Blaine, Daniel, and then there's been many others along the way who have built individual applications, or PIs who have whose these models were outputs of their projects. And then last but not least, Mike Catan, who unfortunately passed away last year. He was our department chair for the last 20 years, and he was a world-renowned expert in clinical risk prediction and medical decision-making. And so riskcalc.org was really his idea, and he was the creator of the whole thing, and he really wanted to make all of the models and things he's built over the years easily and accessibly available to clinicians and patients around the globe, kind of free to use. So thank you very much. I've added a link to the slides here, and we can take any questions.